Hello, Lesbros. It's been a while. We've had a
Hello.
bit of time off over the spring. And Zen, this is your first time on our show. I can't really call you a new member anymore because you're not a new member. You've been
Oh,
with us for a while, but this is the first time you've been recording with us.
I think it's fair to call me new because I haven't done the actual meetings, so it's my first time.
And you're
Yeah.
wearing your Lesbros official t-shirt.
Yes. Thank you, Aaron, for giving it to me. I love it.
I love seeing it. So we have just finished reading together the book The Politics of Reality by Marilyn Frye. Just off the top, what did you think? What was your overall impression of it?
Well, this was published. Am I correct in thinking this was this is a book from somewhere around 1985-ish?
That sounds right. I don't remember exactly the date. It was 1983. Yeah, so you're almost right on the nose.
So it was sort of an interesting read, broaching the topic of intersectionality before I feel like it was a really hot cultural topic that before it hit mainstream. And it also struck me as something that was a little bit older because I didn't read about the gender politics of the day. It wasn't coming through the book in exactly, I think, the way that it would be now, the transing of the language and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was written before any of that really became a hot topic. So it'll be interesting to talk about it as we see it applying today and into our lives and in this particular political moment, if it still holds true or if it feels like it's sort of missing the mark. Were there any points just off the top that you just felt like, yeah, this that really stood out for you or you have a burning desire to talk about? Otherwise, I'll just walk us through each chapter.
I'm down
For
for a
me,
walk. Then it's
You're down for a walk? A
I
nice
did have I did have two points in the book that really stood out to me. Um, if we could start off with those.
Yeah.
The first one is in the first chapter or in the first essay. It's taking me a while to find the page, but it's the one where she kind of talks about her concept of sexism and what she thinks it means. And then she talks about her encounter with a person that she couldn't figure out what their sex was. And she kind of talks about the compulsory need in our society to put people in a box to like figure out how to treat them and how to have social interactions with them. And when that doesn't happen automatically, there's like a I don't know, like a glitch. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to proceed. You don't know how to treat the person. Maybe there's fear. So I thought that was on topic for us. And then also in the chapter on lesbian feminism and gay rights, I thought there was a lot in there that we could talk about.
Yeah,
Um,
I thought so too.
yeah.
Okay, so why don't we walk through it? The sexism part was chapter two, so we'll get to that. So chapter one was more broadly defining what oppression is, and that's where she develops the metaphor of the birdcage. What did you think of that metaphor? Did that work for you?
I thought so. I thought that the multi-pronged interpretation of what it means to be enclosed in your oppressive experience. I mean, it was sort of it was a good illustration of what I understand to be intersectionality, which if for us would be, we've got, the traditional sort of mainstream culturally recognized sexism that we faced with transphobia on top of it. Those of us that are um, identifying as people of color or indigenous people have a whole nother layer to it. So I thought it made perfect sense to me.
Yeah, so for those that might be listening that haven't read the book, so she's chapter one, she's attempting to define what oppression is. So she differentiates it from just ordinary mishaps, like just being uncomfortable or hurt or that isolated incidents, even severe ones, isolated incidents aren't oppression. What makes it oppression is that it's systemic and patterned. And so she uses the image of a bird cage to show the series of double binds that when people are oppressed, they're faced with it's like every option comes with a cost. So that's what she means. That's what we would mean by double bind. And a single wire wouldn't contain the bird. So, you know, a single hardship or disadvantage may not be enough to be called oppression if we can adapt and if the bird can fly around a single wire. But when you put enough wires in place, that's what prevents the bird from taking flight. And so I think it's a really fantastic metaphor for oppression. In a lot of our talks in the book club so far, as things have come up in conversation, we've mentioned that concept of the double bind of just situations in our lives that feels like damned if we do, damned if we don't. Like no matter what we choose, there's every choice is a shitty choice.
And I think also there's like that there's an illusion of choice in the first place because of that, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, using myself as an example, like I can look back on phases of my life and think, oh, well, if I had chosen to live a life that was more conforming, then I would be free of XYZ. Or if I had chosen to like identify with the category of trans in the way that it exists in the mainstream now, I wouldn't have to deal with XYZ. But every time, every choice I consider comes with such a cost that I wind up back at this is the experience I was going to have. Like I was going to be in this experience. And the idea that I could have escaped it might be totally constructed.
Or it could have been worse. And I've felt that many times in life too. I mean, I feel like I've looked back and I feel like I've made some shitty choices, but I have to remind myself that in the moment, given the choices I had, I made the best choice I could. Like, so is that a shitty choice? Like, it's all of my available choices were shitty. So I made the best
Also,
one I could given the circumstances. And
I was gonna say that um, with oppression, I think the perception that we have a choice um, is like our attempt to kind of psychological attempt to control the situation, but the problem is that we can't control the situation in the first place, no matter what we do. And like the oppressor or the outside society or the system, whatever we want to call that, wants us to think we have a choice so that we feel responsibility for the way that we are treated. Um, but I feel the same, especially like with my masculinity, no matter like if I'm transitioning and presenting as male or now off of testosterone trying to present as a masculine woman, um, it doesn't really like it still sucks. Neither way is like easier, and either way people don't I guess don't like me is like a nicer way to put it, but um the pressures don't go away, and there's this like judgment that I don't know, isn't I feel like isn't deserved, if that makes sense. Um yeah. But I the metaphor of a cage, like I wish it were a cage so that I could see it and break it, but because it's not physical, it's easy for other people to say, "Oh, but you're free." Um,
Yeah.
so if there was like a, maybe it's like an invisible, like, those ropes that they use to fish, and like you're tied by that rope, so
Yeah.
no one can see it, but you feel it.
Yeah. Well, she
Yeah.
made the point in the introduction of the book that the whole point of the book is to make those patterns visible.
Mm,
Because she said that because oppression is systemic, it doesn't necessarily require a tyrant, with standing over you with a whip, right? It's not always that overt. And so when it's embedded into our systems and just how we think normal everyday life should go, it becomes invisible to us. And so we experience it, right? We feel maybe the heaviness and the disadvantage of it, but we can't always see why, right? We can't always actually see that we're in a birdcage. So that she said that was the whole point of the book, but that was also the whole point of feminist consciousness raising back in the day is when you have you heard that line, the personal is political? Is that something that you've
yes,
heard before?
yes.
So, I mean, what that meant was in isolation of one another, we can have these circumstances and situations that we feel burdened by, but we just maybe, like I said, we just maybe accept that as that's just how life is. But when women got together and shared stories, that's what started to make the birdcage visible because it's like, oh, well, this isn't just my isolated experience. You're also experiencing it, and you're also experiencing it, and you're also experiencing it, even though we might all be very different and, from I mean, the three of us were from different geographical locations, different ages, different backgrounds, right? But we still have experiences in common. And so that is what the personal is political, means is that these things that we think are just our own private personal experiences, when we see them as patterned and that other people are also experiencing them, then we realize, okay, this is actually political. This isn't just a personal experience. And part of what I really want for trans men and masculine women, because I think, what am I trying to say? The patterns for trans men don't really change. So I think there's a lot of value in trans men and masculine women coming together as we are to share these experiences so that we can start to recognize those patterns. We've become so disconnected from one another. And then you add to that, with the way that some trans men believe that they truly are men. So everything they experience, they reinterpret it through the lens of, well, this is a man's experience, even when the patterns of their experience are actually female patterned. I mean, that's what I'm trying to show in my research, looking at sexual assault research, that there are clear patterns, and those patterns don't change just because I now pass in the world as a man. Like the hardships that we face continue to be female patterned. Um, so I think that's the value of feminism for trans men, and the value of us having these conversations is that we can start to identify those continuities.
Absolutely. And I think trans men are experiencing such hardship right now, like such intense silencing, um, maybe through the category of man, and there's no way to say to out loud to them or from them, yes, this is a trans man. We're not debating whether or not this is a trans man. We're trying to make room in the category of man where there is no room for them to say, I'm experiencing this and this and this and this because I've had this female assignment. And that's hugely silencing. And in that silence, we can't see those patterns. We can't see the bars to that cage. Trans men can't see that between themselves, between ourselves. I mean, like, and I think it's intentional. I think it's really speaks to the power that trans men have in their voice, that there's some power out there that doesn't want to hear from it.
Yeah, we've been squeezed out of the conversation, but we've been squeezed out of understanding our own experiences. That's especially the level of my concern is as I feel like trans men are increasingly blind to the harms that they're actually facing. And they're not recognizing that as systemic and patterned in a way that is accurate, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think I'm especially fearful for young trans men and young people in general that are identifying as masculine females or butch females or trans men because I think they're being told if you're going to identify as yourself, it inherently means that you don't feel these things, you don't experience these things, and no one wants to hear from you about these things. And it's working. We're not hearing from anybody.
Yeah, I think when I was transitioning, for me, the reason I didn't feel comfortable talking about my struggles was because I don't know if this is shared, but I felt like I chose to struggle that way because I chose to transition. Um, and it felt like I don't know. Part of the thinking is, the masculine is like, oh, men don't complain, um, and like you're supposed to be strong and all of that. Like, yes, that was part of it, but also like if I guess the thinking was if I really identify as a man, um, then I shouldn't complain about the hardship that comes with transitioning to one. Um, like I should stay tough and push through the hardship. And then there is the other side of it where I think in the LGBT community, sometimes uh, it's like, oh, well, you transition to a position of power. Obviously, you don't experience any discrimination. Like, that's not true.
You can't transition to power. That's not how power
Yeah,
works. So everyone would do that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone all females experience misogyny, but not all females transition.
But we lose the ability to name it that. So in some ways, I feel like misogyny intensified for me when I became a trans man because everyone knows that we're stuck in this double bind. Everyone knows that if I'm going to play this game of I'm a man, I'm a man, I'm a man, then I can't name misogyny when it happens, right? And people know that, and people take advantage of that. It's one of the things that makes trans men very vulnerable, is because our ability to name what's happening to us has been impaired, and our ability to even see what's happening to us is often impaired.
I think it's like a really well kept secret somehow that like passing trans men who pass as cis men are, but it's such a difficult experience. Like it is so hard. The misogyny does dial up, and you're underneath so many layers of invisibility and different kinds of misogyny that you're not allowed to ask for help. You're not allowed to name it. You're hard pressed for anybody that even believes you. And yet there's this narrative that passing trans men are at the top of the pile as far as the community is concerned and receiving copious amounts of privilege that they've transitioned into. It's so not true. I don't know how to tell people.
It's absolutely not true. You can't identify out of misogyny. And yeah, so I mean, that's been my experience. I wouldn't say like it's not like I'm miserable, but I've noticed that the precariousness, masculine women are already precarious. Um, there's this myth that masculinity automatically gives us privilege, like whether we're masculine women or trans men, that somehow gives us this magical privilege, but it doesn't. Because we're challenging gender stereotypes, we're not playing along with what society says women are supposed to be. Men aren't sharing power with us, right? And more normative appearing women who benefit from the system, who are rewarded from the system by playing along with it, they're more powerful than us. Like, who are we more powerful than? Like, it, we don't have this magic privilege, but yeah, it's our ability to name that. We're actually painted into a corner where we experience misogyny, even to the degree of, that's why I'm so interested in looking at sexual assault, because that's sort of the one of the most overt expressions of misogyny, one of the most violent expressions of misogyny is sexual assault, right? I mean, you take misogyny to its extreme, that's one of the forms of violence it takes. And trans men are continuing to experience that, but they're not able to name it that. And they're not able to really see the power dynamics underlying that. And they're not believed even when they do try to name it, because we don't fit the scripts of a the stereotype of a female victim. And so for us to say, well, I was sexually assaulted, or that, this happened and this happened and this happened, we're less likely to believe, even if we can find language for it. So it's created it's intensified aspects, I think, of our female oppression.
100%. Absolutely. And trans men aren't even allowed to have each other.
No. Let's move on to the second. I mean, the second chapter is about sexism, so we can just kind of seamlessly move into that. So she talks about, as you said, Zen, she talks about how the way that we classify sex is so embedded into our culture that we don't even know how to interact with people unless we know which sex they are. And I think that's why gender nonconformity makes people so uncomfortable. Now, on Saturday Night Live, there used to be a long-running skit of this gender nonconforming person named, was that Saturday Night Live?
Are you
She's
talking
gender
about Pat?
Pat, yeah, and nobody knew which sex Pat was, and it was this long-standing joke on the show about how uncomfortable it made everybody to not know which sex Pat was. I experienced something similar to that before my daughter was born. We knew from the ultrasound which sex she was going to be, but we decided not to tell anybody. And it wasn't like one of those weird things like, oh, I'm going to raise my child gender neutral or whatever. It wasn't that. We just decided to keep it as a surprise. But it really bothered people. That was eye-opening for me. People kept pressing us, like they really demanded to know, no, like which sex is the baby going to be? Because I can't. It's like they couldn't even conceive it as a person unless they knew which sex it was. And they kept saying, well, but I want to be able to buy stuff and I don't know, like, should I buy pink? Should I buy blue? Like, I don't know what to buy unless I know what sex it is. And I just said, find something purple or green, like, figure it out. Like, but it was interesting, right? It's like they don't know how to engage with other people. You
It
know,
is
it's
fascinating that something so private is so public. I never really thought about it until I started, I guess, thinking about my experience. But yeah, it really bothers people when they don't know what your genitalia is. I thought it was interesting when she said that part of it might have to do with heterosexuality, and people being afraid of falling in love potentially with someone who is of the same sex. I thought it was an interesting thought. Um, but I just think it has to do with sexuality broadly and rules of sexuality. It's frustrating.
I found it kind of refreshing to hear a feminist say that even she gets caught in that trap. Like she doesn't know how to interact with someone unless she knows which sex they are. I mean, it's hard to live outside. It's impossible to live outside of the system. And I
Yeah,
think that's
because
why when we transition, I mean, what back when I did this, we didn't have the term like dead name and stuff like that. But you would sometimes hear parents or trans people themselves feel like, that person is dead and a new person is born. And I never really experienced it like that. I mean, but I think that speaks to the same problem here. It's like you can't conceptualize a continuity of personhood across female presenting and male presenting, right? Like, I don't know quite how to articulate that, but it's like our whole way of understanding what a person is so sexed that if you think you're changing sex, then it's like the only way people can understand that then is I died and here's this new person, right? And parents experience that, right? Parents experience the grief of the loss of their son or daughter, and then have to form a new relationship with this new person because I mean, that's one of the things I think that makes transition so hard because I'm still the same person, right? I mean, I'm the same person experienced all those stages of life, but it does create this rupture of, pre-transition and post-transition as if they're two completely different people.
I thought that was strange with my family when I was a very young person and I came out and they were telling me that they were grieving me and I'm was like I'm right here still
Yeah.
still right here. But I think in retrospect they were really grieving the loss of maybe the version of themselves that got to look at that way, look at me and look at the world that way seamlessly and and belong to that ideology without question. Because and maybe grieving a version of themselves that was allowed to see me a certain way, and that makes sense because it's so embedded into how we think.
It's not entirely unlike the grief that my parents expressed when I came out as a lesbian. They felt like they were grieving too. And I think what they're grieving is they imagine we have a certain place within this system, right? They imagine you're going to grow up and you're going to be this pretty woman and you're going to marry this man that we think is awesome and he's going to be our new son-in-law and we're going to have this like I'm going to have grandbabies and like right? So they're planning out our future for us in advance based on how they imagine we fit within the system. And then whether we're lesbians or whether we transition, we disrupt that. So now they have to sort of reimagine a whole world now that doesn't entirely make sense to them. It's like, okay, so am I gonna then have this new like this new daughter in my life then if you get married? And does that mean you're not having kids? And so they don't know how to imagine our lives and their place in our lives.
I
It,
suppose I've struggled that with that too, though, like on my own. Like I do feel sometimes like I live with the phantom, like a ghost, that version that they imagined for me is living parallel to me, and I am the destroyer of that person who lives in her place. Like that's also a feeling I can't shake.
when I moved out of my parents' house, one of the first times I went back to visit, my mom had turned my entire room into this like weird hyper feminine like I wore a dress to my high school graduation to please her. Like I didn't want the fight. I just wanted to get through graduation and so I wanted to make her happy and so I wore a dress. So and it wasn't a typical grad dress at all. It was almost like an antique dress. Like it was bone colored and had sort of lace and so it wasn't like one of those big poofy like prom dress kind of things, almost more of a like a Victorian dress. And anyway, so she had she kept the dress and so hung the dress on my door, and the few photos that she took for my graduation, that's what she printed and framed. And that so and she brought in all these like flowers and all this frilly stuff and like completely redid my room, but with my photos and my name and my dress. And it's like she created this whole, this is who I wished you were, out of my room. It was, and almost like you're dead, and I'm going to create this like tribute to you who wasn't even me, right? It was just this like image in her head of this pretty princess. I'm going to recreate your room as if my pretty princess died. And it's like, but I've never been that. Like even before, and I hadn't even transitioned at that point. That wasn't even on the table. I was just a lesbian at that time. So, but that was her response, was like my, basically like my imaginary you is more important to me than you.
Yeah. That's very hurtful. I think a similar thing, it wasn't as intense, but when I told my parents that I would be, or I just told them, like, at the time I was identified as non-binary, I wasn't even saying I'm like transitioning or anything. I was just like, this is how I feel. Um, and there was like a big overreaction. Um, and my mom stopped talking to me, but she told me through my father um, that like I was living a lie and like I had to wake up from like I don't know this imaginary version of myself and go back to my true self. Um, but I agree with Aiden that, and Aaron, you too, that it's just this like version that they want us to be, um, and that they think they knew, and it hurts parents especially when they learn that they didn't know you. Especially a mother, like, oh, you came out of me and I raised you. How? What do you mean I don't know you? But we suppress ourselves for our whole lives for so long, like we're not even really allowed to explore who we are until we get much older, sometimes like really old. Um, and yeah, it really shakes people, especially parents. I think I didn't feel my transition was a death, but when I started detransitioning to be a masculine woman, that was really hard for me because for myself, I set out a role of being a man, and I was getting kind of comfortable in that. I don't have a typical transition story, but you know, like before that, I wasn't really established as a person, but I became established, sort of more established than I was before as a man. Um, and everyone in my day to day kind of knew me as a man, except my parents, who saw me as a girl still. uh, so that did feel like a death, and like I had to kill that version of myself. And there was, for me, a lot of pain involved in that because I put so much pride, or like I had to put a lot of pride into that because otherwise I would have crumbled. Because transition, I think, is so hard for everybody. So intentionally destroying that didn't feel good, but I feel better now. Yeah.
How much of those differences, because those different, how we think of the sexes is so embedded into our thinking and into our just our daily systems. In your opinion, do you think that's all just imaginary? Do you think that's just a cultural construct, or do you think that there are significant differences between the sexes that creates that?
I've thought about this a lot, especially thinking about like, is it even desirable to have a society that's divided by sex? Um, That's such a difficult question because I think a lot of gender non-conforming people will want to say no. I know for me, I'm like, oh, why do we do this? This is so stupid. I clearly don't fit the mold, and I'm still a woman, but why is my genitalia important? All that. Um, but I think I wouldn't have transitioned if I didn't believe I had a sort of innate masculine in me that I've had to repress throughout my life. Um, so when people ask, like, is it natural or is it social? Um, I guess I wouldn't want to say it's unnatural because I feel that my masculinity is kind of a part of me that feels innate, but it is social in the sense that it doesn't seem to have anything to do with having two legs or having a vagina. Um, but on the other hand, I was thinking about like female stages of life in terms of reproduction, and I think for most women, it does seem to make sense to have community around like stages of life when you like get your period, and then a lot of women do end up rearing children, so it's nice to be around other people who are doing the same. And then when you go through menopause, it's also nice. But for people like us who have a very different experience to that, I think especially lesbians, um, it just it doesn't feel it feels like there's no use in that because it's so different to what we go through. um, yeah, and it doesn't feel natural to us.
Yeah, I would say that I think, um, I mean, we see when we pay attention that the categories of man and woman as they aren't the ultimate truths. There's a lot of history and a lot of cultures that have handled gender differently and understand it differently. And um, as far as, the, the binary of male and female sex, I mean, it is what it is. And I'm sure that what differences there are, I think are so filled with meaning that is constructed and probably isn't really there. But as they say in sociology, I can't remember who said it, but if something is believed to be real, it is real in its consequences. And we see that with sex difference. It almost doesn't matter. There's inherent differences between the sexes in modern culture. We believe that the category of man and male is infused with power, and so it is, and that people who are meant to be female in this life are oppressed and subservient to the other category. And so that's the way that it is. I don't think there's anything natural about that. I think it's actually very unnatural. But um, but there's no doubt that we're seeing it play out because we believe it to be real together.
Yeah, I mean, if it's entirely natural, then why does it need to be enforced so violently? If it would just come natural to us, right? Like we wouldn't have to police it. We would all just be naturally doing it. But then, like you said, Sam, at the same time, it's like, but then why am I masculine? Like, if there's nothing like innate or biological or about it, then why? Like, it's never been a conscious choice that I've made. I mean, there have been
Right,
conscious
because
choices to at times feminize my appearance to fit in better or choose to stop doing that. Like, so I mean, I made those kinds of choices, but that was more about, do I honor myself or do I suppress myself to fit in better? So that was the choice I made. I didn't make the choice to be more masculine. And that's something that that wasn't just in my head. I mean, that's something that other people picked up on since I was really, really, really small, is everyone thought that I was a little boy. Well, and they're obviously basing that on stereotypes, but why was I behaving that way in the first place?
That part does feel very innate. I'm not sure where that comes from. And I've felt that too, where I don't know why why would this be if I'm socialized for
I
this
know.
to entirely not be? But um, I have to hop off, but it's helpful. I will say it's helpful to see it reflected in outside of me and people like you guys, because I think we're just inherently maybe badass or something, and it's coming out this way, and we're being punished.
Nice to see you, Aiden. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Biden, take care.
Yeah. So let's just keep wandering through this book. So the next chapter, she talks about the problem that has no name. And the main idea that she uses the word phallism, which assumes full humanity and personhood is male, so examples of that would be things like how research has tended to be done on men, just assuming that whatever is true for men would also be for women. So there's just this assumption that men represent all of humanity and women are sort of an afterthought. And we see that playing out with trans men too, right? Is like, why aren't trans men as active in advocacy? Why aren't we as visible? Why aren't we being researched as much? Like we're all still going back to what we were saying earlier, that those patterns persist for us, that we're still sidelined,
I know.
we're still like the default tends to be the trans women, and it's just
Yes.
assumed like all the research is about them. Most of the advocacy is just focused on them. And it's just assumed by, saying trans people. It's like, no, that's the trans women's experience. You can't just assume that we have the identical experience.
I agree. I think the experience of being a trans man, I think Aiden used the word, but is kind of invisible. It's like, oh, I don't exist. Except a few times when it's convenient for people to bring up trans men. So
Yeah. But usually to mock us in some way.
yeah.
Because we were, the only times trans men seem to make the news is if we get pregnant or
Mm.
some opportunity to kind of make fun of us. But
I think that or to make a point. Um, yeah, as in, something will be brought up about trans women, and then saying, "Oh, well, trans men," but only to like prove a point or an argument that's not meant to support trans men,
yeah,
or
like using our
interests.
pictures. Do you really want a Buck Angel in women's bathrooms? Like
Yeah.
they trash Buck Angel day in and day out, but always use his picture when it comes to the bathroom argument. And I think he would be fine in a women's bathroom. Like if someone told him that's the bathroom you need to use, like, okay. But she goes on to talk about how concepts are socially controlled and that a dominant group can shape what counts as a person and what is believed um and social practices determine who really counts. So, I mean, what other ways do you see that playing out for trans men? I mean, do you feel like we're treated as fully human, or do you feel like we're being um suppressed by dominant narrative? Because the dominant narrative is not one that we came up with. And do you feel like that dominant narrative serves us, or do you feel like it in some ways suppresses us, or a combination of the two?
So I have to think about that one. I think we kind of talked about that in the beginning, where because and obviously now I'm detransitioning, so it's I don't know if I should speak. I know I do speak for trans men, but um because we are put down so much, there is a lot of incentive for us to create this like perfect image, and a polished image, and for us like not to talk about our struggles, especially if they relate to femaleness. Um, so I think people sometimes talk about like model minority, and that's usually when talking about race. But I think it can apply to sexuality and transition as well, um, where there's like this picture perfect version of what a trans man should be, um, and that's usually what is uplifted or brought up in the media. Um, yeah, I don't know if I can think.
That reminds me a little bit, as you're explaining that, it reminds me a little bit of one of the things that I sometimes saw happening in church communities too, where everyone puts on their best clothes and their best, their best game face, right? To go. It's like, I am righteous. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to be righteous. And then as soon as you walk out the church, you're right back to
Yes, yes,
cuss words in your grimy clothes. Like it's which isn't what a church is supposed to be, right? It's not a place where you all go and pretend to be good people. It's a place where you actually are supposed to bring your brokenness and ask for community, ask for support, it's supposed to be a journey to wholeness. You don't get there when you just show up pretending to already have it all together because and when you do that, everyone around you seems to have it all together. And then you
mhm,
know that you're just faking it. And so you think, well, all these other people have it together and I don't, right? And it can actually make a person more isolated and feel like I'm alone in what I'm struggling with. So I think the trans community does something very similar. It's so focused on image that we're all doing great, right? We want to prove so much that this was the right choice for me. It's the right, because we rely on that for the political narrative that this is
yes,
all great and everyone should be supporting it. Um, but the cost of that is we're not actually talking honestly about, well, but what are we actually struggling with? Like if everyone is just sort of putting on this performance of this rocks and I'm doing awesome and not that I want everyone to necessarily say, well, this is shitty and I regret it, but when we're not honest about what we're actually struggling with, we feel like we're alone in whatever we're struggling with, which brings us back to the beginning of this book, that the whole point of feminism is getting women together to share those experiences so that they recognize it's not just me, right? And if trans men could do that, that if we could just knock off this act, right? That everything has to always be perfect and rosy, and actually talk honestly about how we're struggling, how it's hard. We start to realize like that's when we start to see the patterns and we start to see where is it just me and the individual choices I'm making, or where is this a patterned form of oppression and vulnerability? And then if it's patterned, what are the mechanisms of those patterns? Like if we can't see that and if we can't name that, we can't do anything about it. And then our lives aren't going to improve.
and I really connect with what you said about kind of in community. Whenever I've tried to um, be in community with other trans people, um, or like people in that spectrum or people transitioning, um, I felt like I couldn't talk about like the stuff that actually mattered. I ended up not sharing about like my detransition ruminations with the trans people that I knew because I didn't want to affect them negatively. But um, I was like always wondering like, oh, am I the only one who's really worried about getting top surgery? Like, oh, does this mean something's wrong with me? Um, Or am I the only one who's worried about this friend transitioning because I don't think they should transition? Or, stuff like that. Or being scared at all about the medical process or not feeling sure at all. Um, I think a big part of it, though, for me was that I didn't want to be questioned, because so many people are already questioning me. My family, and it felt like the whole world was saying, "Don't do this," and it's a really big decision to make. So I didn't want it to be wrong, and then just kept pushing, pushing, and until I had so many pressures that I felt like I should stop. Um, and I didn't feel comfortable talking with most other trans people, especially my friends, um, about how I felt until like a few months into the transition, just because I didn't want those thoughts to affect them. But I do think it's really important that we all do talk about those fears, because if we don't, then it's not a community. It's just, it's not real. It's fake, as you said. And I do think there is a problem of um, wrong think, like there's the right thing to think and a wrong thing to think, because the issue is so politicized. Not the issue, but just transition in general is so politicized, that any it feels like bringing up thoughts that are wrong would have like too much social cost, and that it's something wrong with you. Um, so I do think that's another aspect of it. Um, yeah, and it's not only with gender that this happens. I think politics in general can be like that nowadays. It's kind of a new religion, I guess. But yeah,
Seems like social media has made that worse. There's something about social media that seems to polarize people more and more and more.
definitely.
So chapter 4 was in and out of harm's way, and she makes the distinction between what she calls the arrogant I, in which a perceiver assumes that the world is really for his use, his interpretation, his control, versus the loving I, which is a disciplined willingness to recognize that another being exists independently of you. So it's just two different mindsets. I mean, do you agree that it tends to be one sex more than the other that has the arrogant I versus the loving I?
Honestly, reading through this, I couldn't help but think about how many women in my life were putting me down, and because I think in my life specifically, it's been mostly my mother, and like older women who have really pushed femininity on me. And my mother is like the biggest negative influence, unfortunately, in terms of that. And my male relatives have been more accepting of my masculinity. So, um, in reading this, I couldn't help but think about that for myself, and how women do this to each other, and about my mother. um, yeah. And I do end up thinking about the tension between feminine woman and masculine woman. Um, I think there are often conflicts. I think in feminism, for example, masculine women can be accused of sort of being misogynist and being masculine. Um, as in, like, oh, well, you're masculine because you hate femininity and you hate yourself secretly. And I think trans men especially get accused of that. As in telling trans men, oh, you're transitioning because of internalized misogyny. And maybe that's true for some, but I think there's other aspects to it that don't have anything to do with hating women. And then there's obviously the other way around where feminine women and femininity are painted as kind of catering to men. Um,
But I think that's one of the double binds of kind of going back to the birdcage. One of the double binds of being female is that damned if you do, damned if you don't. So if you're the feminine woman, you are rewarded in some ways, right? I mean, you can attract the rich prince and who may protect you, but you're also it's also a trap, like because you have to give up certain things in order to play that game, and a pretty woman might not be seen as intelligent, right? Or might not be seen as capable. So but on the other flip side of that is, yeah, I mean, when you're not the pretty woman, when you're a masculine woman, we are accused of all kinds of things, like just so many assumptions about why we're not the pretty woman. And feminism, and that's why I liked, in that one chapter where she admits, like, even though she's a feminist, like, we still continue to struggle with these things, that she still feels like she doesn't know how to engage people unless she knows what sex they are. And yet I
mhm.
don't think she's saying that women should all be the pretty princesses. So what am I trying to say? It's like, on one hand, feminism is saying, well, we don't want you to feel like you have to be a pretty princess, but then if you're a masculine woman who wants to just own that, it's like, this is me, and it's actually a lot of work to defend this in the world, and yet so many women are like, well, you're just misogynist and you've abandoned your womanhood and you're doing this because you hate women. It's like, well, you don't want me to be the pretty woman either, like.
I
so
know. Yes, it's
so
like
it
no
is
matter
that
what you
double
do.
bind, right? It's a damned if
Yeah.
you do, damned if you don't.
Yes. And with transition to, I think if you obviously maybe that's not true for others, but um, for me, if I don't identify as trans, I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to use that label for myself anymore because I feel it's healthier for me to see myself as a woman. So now I call myself a gender nonconforming woman. But then there's no community around being a gender nonconforming woman, so I'm purposely isolating myself from people who are like me, um, and possibly also making them angry at me. Um, but then if I transition, then there's a whole new group of people who are angry at me. So yeah, it's like no matter what you do, it's wrong. And I think about that a lot because I'm thinking, well, is there anyone who isn't asked or judged for how they are? And I guess that's just masculine men, pretty much. Why are you like that? No one asks that, and no one. Well, I guess masculine men get the it's toxic masculinity. So maybe there is that side to it. I think gender in general,
I feel like that's a fairly new thing, though.
it is new. It is
Yeah.
new. Um, but I think with gender, it's like no matter where you are positioned, um, it is sort of a struggle in a cage. But for masculine men, it does come with power. So
Yeah. And she says that, like, she says that men can be oppressed, but not because they're men,
yeah,
right?
they're
So
oppressed by other
so
men.
men could be oppressed because they're of a lower class or because of their race, or so they can, it's, men do experience oppression, but not on the basis of being men, whereas women are subordinated on the basis of being women.
Yeah,
Chapter 5, a note on anger. I thought it was interesting where she went with that. So she said that anger often carries a claim about the relationship between people. So anger implies that you expect or hold somebody responsible for what they've done. But she said that anger for subordinated people is frequently treated as threatening. So when a woman is, and I think I agree with her there that when you are part of an oppressed group, it's almost like the expectation of you is that you're just supposed to kind of be cheerful and pleasant about that. You just put a smile on your face and make it easy for me to oppress you. Um, Anger is something that I've really struggled with as a trans man, because I am female and I continue to experience the world as female and all of the same disadvantages. And as a gender non-conforming female, both before and after transition, I mean, we're kind of at the bottom of the pecking order no matter where we go.
Yes.
Among men, we're always the bottom of the pecking order. Even when we pass as men, we're usually at the bottom of the pecking order. It would actually be very dangerous, I think, for us to ever climb the social ladder among men. Um, because if we ever did that and then it was disclosed that we were actually female, I think they would very quickly tear that down. Because they would see it as you have no legitimate place as having any power authority in our pecking order. And among women, there is also a pecking order, and um yeah, so we're all often put down by women, and we are expected to just kind of smile and nod about it, right? And that's something that I've created in my personality is just sort of a bit of a goofball. If I can just make people laugh and goof around and play dumb, like then I'm not threatening, and it's it's worked for me for to a degree, but even women that start off attracted to us, like as soon as something goes wrong, like everybody knows what our social position is, right? Everybody knows the precarious position that we're in. And every every interaction can very quickly turn on that. Like every breakup I've ever had, even among women who are attracted to masculine women, every breakup I've ever had, they know where I'm vulnerable. They know my precarious position, and they'll use that, right? And I'm not saying that very well, but it's like we are coming from a place of marginalization. The difficulty though is because it is hard not to get angry about that sometimes, afraid or angry and frustrated. But now that I appear male, I mean, it's dangerous as a woman to get angry because then this is what she's talking about. Because when women are insubordinated, you're supposed to just be the pretty girl that giggles at all the male jokes, right? And make it easy for men. And so when a woman is pushing back on that and is angry, then that can go very bad for her too, right? I mean, she's not playing along with the role she's expected to play. When you do that when you're male passing, the anger then looks very different, right? It's when we transition, we bring things in from our sex. We cross that sex line. So when trans men pass as men, we still bring in a lot of our femaleness into that experience in ways that can go very wrong. And that is one of them, is our anger often comes from a place of feeling disadvantaged and frustrated of being in this fucking cage. But it when we're male passing, that anger, then it's not read as
Legitimate. Yeah.
as vulnerability, it's read
Mm,
as aggression. So I spent a lot of time with that chapter just because that's what that got me thinking about was just because she did say anger is not always it's not always liberating. And she went on to say that anger can bind people together. Like, and that's sort of the value of forgiveness is as long as we're angry at someone, we're tied to that. But she didn't really, her book isn't about trans, right? So she didn't talk about what happens when you break that social contract that if a marginalized person is expected to kind of, did you ever see the movie The Color Purple?
no,
No.
I
Okay, so
haven't. Sorry.
this won't work then. But so I mean, it's about a community of Black people in this deep South and the racism they were experiencing. And there was this one woman, very strong-willed, played by Oprah Winfrey, very strong-willed woman. You could tell she was just getting fed up with being treated like shit, right? And everyone would always try to contain her. It's like because they knew that if she stepped out of line, if she pushed back, if she became angry at the oppressor, it wouldn't liberate her. She would be punished for it. And that's exactly what happened. So someone was treating her like shit, and I think she ended up decking him one, and he deserved it. But she ended up going to jail, and it totally broke her and ruined her life. It's similar like that, I think, for all oppressed groups that there are consequences. I mean, the anger is justified, but it can increase our precarious position if we express it.
Yes, and I think for people who are in positions of power, often anger is seen as legitimate. Like they have the power to exercise it, and so it often goes unquestioned or unpunished, like with rape by men or um, even like police violence. But if it's someone who is oppressed expressing anger, only then it's seen as dangerous and stepping out of line because it's not seen as legitimate anger. Um, and it's kind of seen as troublemaking, I guess. And what you were saying about like relationships, I guess that's not exactly on the topic of anger, but when you're so close to other people, I think unfortunately a lot of people think about, oh, how does this reflect on me? How does this relationship like reflect on me? Um, and if they decide to break up with us, or if the relationship is going wrong, or if they feel that being with us is affecting like their social status, they will misplace that anger on us as opposed to placing anger where it's due, which is social norms and
Yeah.
sexism. And it really sucks because we're often blamed for everything that happens to us. And like, how are you not supposed to get angry at that? Um, Something that I thought about when I read this chapter was that it got much easier for me to be angry when I transitioned, actually. I used to think that I'm not angry, not an angry person, and I was like, I've never felt anger in my life. But once I transitioned and others started seeing me as male, and I also started seeing myself as like in that role, it became much easier for me to feel like I can express that. And I also felt that people in general should talks about how
Can I ask a
um,
question about that
oh
before
yeah,
you do you think that's because I know a lot of people think that testosterone makes us angry, but do you think it was because you felt if people see you as male that you're just allowed to express that in a way that you couldn't before, or was it more
certainly I don't think
hormonal or
it didn't feel hormonal related. Um when I didn't notice the changes from hormones when I transitioned, but I did notice when I did transitioned. Um, so maybe I'll update you on that. But I do think with anger, it was more. So she writes on page 90 that when to get angry is to claim implicitly that one is a certain sort of being, a being which can, and in this case does, stand in a certain relation and position, apropos the being one is angry at. One claims that one is in certain ways and dimensions respectable. So I think that really is what allowed my anger to come out, was that people saw me as like someone having some sort of power because they perceived me as male. Um, and I began to see myself as more in a position of power because of my appearance. And I did start getting more respect from people when out and about in the world. Like people started apologizing to me for no reason. And people started treating me as if I know and I'm knowledgeable in like the fields that, for example, at work or in a classroom. There was just this new sort of freebie for me where appearing male um, did, I do think it did make others treat me with more respect. But, you know, as soon as people clock you or they find out that you're female, is when all of that goes away, I think. Um, and when it does go away, like with my parents, obviously they never saw me as male, even though I appeared more male because of hormones. And their friends didn't see me as male either. So whenever I was around my family and their friends, um, the feeling was actually very different. Um, they kind of treated me like I'm mentally ill, which there's nothing wrong with being mentally ill, but it's just this treatment of like, oh, this person doesn't have cognitive ability of an adult or um, I guess an average person. Um, and I don't think that's something that it felt worse than being treated as a feminine woman. It felt like not being treated as human. So it's like a very fragile place where as soon as people know, it can go very wrong, and all of the like that role that you're in, it can fall apart very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, there were parts of that chapter when I was reading, like some of those chapters I felt like this is really satisfying. But there was parts of the anger chapter that I felt less satisfied with because she was talking about how, so she said anger often carries a claim about the relationship between people. So it implies that you expect or hold someone responsible. So, but I think that misses, like, anger can also be a way of being controlling and entitled
Yes.
and domineering. But when she talks about women's anger, it's about, well, women need to get angry in order to actually hold people accountable and expect equality. So I guess that's why the chapter felt less satisfying to me. It just, not because what she said was wrong, but there's just so much more
I
that
did think it was
could have been
interesting.
explored there.
There was a part, I'm trying to find it, where she talked about, let's see. Hmm. Okay, she did talk about like the domain where a woman can get angry and when where a woman's anger is taken seriously. But there was also a part where she talked about making a man feel as if he's in a position of a child in relation to a woman. I can't find that right now. Never mind, I can find it. It's okay. But I did think it was interesting the places where she brought up women can be angry because their authority is seen as, or our authority is seen as legitimate in those areas, like in the matters of um, children or environmental protection or like places in the house like the kitchen. But as soon as you're out of that very strict realm, then it's not effective.
So it's still connecting anger with authority then. Like if a woman is the authority of the kitchen or the authority of the children, then she's allowed to have anger in those places where she has some authority, but not outside of that.
Yeah. I think it's more about when anger's I think anger is only effective outside of oneself when it's taken seriously, and it's only taken seriously if it's perceived to have authority. Um, and yeah, because usually people fear men who are angry because they have power to hurt you. Um, but if a woman gets angry, um, if she's feminine, she's not taken as a threat. If she's masculine, she might be taken as a threat, but then also taken as mentally ill.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That gets flipped on us a lot too, though, because it's I don't know what the stats are, but it's masculine women and trans men experience more intimate partner violence than women in general by about 6% or something like that. Um, I mean, I've experienced it in relationships with women, and I've always dated feminine women, and they can use that to their advantage. Like going back to what I was saying about how everyone knows that we're in a precarious position, um, and that can so easily get weaponized against us. So it's, when a feminine woman is the abusive one, it can be a lot harder for us to be believed. It can be a lot harder for us to find support, and it can be very easy for her to turn around and say he did it, or she did it, right? That and flip it around, and it's because people are far more likely to believe that if you're masculine, then you're the aggressor.
Yes.
I've seen that happen. I mean, I've experienced it in past relationships, and then I've seen it happen to so many butches and trans men where they're actually the ones being they're actually the ones being abused and nobody believes them.
Yes. And I think in those cases, there can be a lot of humiliation involved too. Like if you come out about it, saying that that's what happened, especially if you transition and people know, I think it can be used as a humiliation of like, oh, but you're a man. Like, stop complaining about it. Um, Horrible.
And especially when you're a masculine woman, because yes, on one hand, if you're the masculine one, people might think like, oh, I think you're so tough, then man up and put her in her place, right?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
then you have the feminist saying, well, if you're masculine, you're you know, a misogynistic prick. So you got one side saying, man up and toughen up and put your woman in your place, and then the other side saying, I just assume that you're going to do that because you are masculine. We take pressure from all sides.
Yes. I do think that's kind of a key characteristic of being trans in general and transitioning is that it's like an ambiguous position because you appear one way, but then your sex is another way, and you experience both. Like you don't stop experiencing your sex, and also you
Yeah.
don't stop experiencing the pressures that come with uh, living with that body, and also the expectations that come with that body. But you also experience a whole other side of expectations because of the transition and the new sex characteristics that come from transition. Um, and it's a really frustrating place to be in because I think before I transitioned, at least for me, I felt like my position was sort of certain. Um, but once I did transition, um, this position of being male appearing but female is really, I don't know what the best word would be, confusing, frustrating, all of it. Because people can really weaponize it from both sides, as we've been talking about. Um, like they can tell us we're not men when it's convenient, and then they can tell us you're a man when it's convenient, to put us down. And it can be hard to know which way to stand up for ourselves because, um, both are being weaponized against us. Um, yeah, and I'm still figuring out how to navigate that.
Yeah. Next chapter, she talks about separatism. And she points out that separatism already exists everywhere, that dominant groups have their own spaces all the time. I mean, there are institutions, clubs, exclusively for men, but as soon as women create spaces of their own, it's somehow seen as suspect. I remember as an art student, we would have once a year we had our own women's art show. And without fail, there would always be men that would walk in saying, "Oh, where's the men's art show?" It's like that's 90% of the show fucking shows out there are men's art shows. Um, so she says that the difference is power, and that women's spaces are created so that they're not continuously orienting themselves to male needs, interpretations, approval, and authority. And I think it goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, that one of the values of, because I don't think, by separatism, she doesn't necessarily mean that women go off and live on their own island and have a completely male-free society. She's talking about the need for female-only spaces and what are the value of those spaces. So I think it goes back to what we were saying, that the value of spaces just for us is so that we can start to see those patterns of oppression, that if we're constantly living in this birdcage, the birdcage can become invisible. And when we actually separate ourselves even momentarily from that and occupy our own spaces where we can share stories amongst each other, that's when these patterns start to become visible. And so I do think that's the value of separatist spaces for any marginalized group. And we used to have that more as trans men in the early days, and butches too. Butches had a community, and when the butches started to medicalize, I mean, we just kind of continued like those same community tools that we were using in lesbian community, we just took with us as trans men and built community using those same tools, and created mentorship groups and conferences and libraries and publishing houses, and we created that for ourselves, and that's been completely dismantled.
Yeah, I was gonna ask because where are all of those groups? My attempts to find community when I was transitioning FTM, it was hard. I found like one. It was called Transmasculine like club or something. It was I guess like a virtual group. But when I attended, I did not feel welcome. They thought I was a troll for some reason. um, I don't know what it was. Maybe I was too well passing by then or something. I don't know what happened, but I decided to not come again. Um, and I think there's actually so few from my experience, at least there aren't a lot of trans men spaces. And I am a part of like one trans virtual group right now. And it was started by a person who I think is female but identifies as non-binary, kind of like on the masculine spectrum. Um, but the virtual group became like all trans women. And there are currently like 3 or 4 FTMs if you include me. Um, so I feel like every time that there's something for trans people, it's for trans women. uh,
Yeah.
and that's really difficult. And then yeah, with gender nonconforming community, it's always grouped together with the trans community now. So um, for me right now, it can be hard because I'm trying to get away from like hormones and surgery because I think that might be better for me. But no such thing exists.
Yeah.
So I'm currently in the. I'm hoping I can start a group with Frankie. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah, that would be good. That actually leads us nicely into the next chapter. I'm going to skip a little bit just because we've been going for a while. I want to wrap up. But she has a chapter where she talks about lesbian feminism and gay rights movement and
Yes.
some of the challenges that, when I first came out, gay and lesbian had already been merged together. There was a time when they were separate, when they advocated separately. And then I remember when the B was added, and then ever since then, right, they got all these letters and now even some numbers being added to this long acronym. So she talks about, because this was written in the 80s, she was talking about some of the challenges with forming coalitions between lesbians and gay men, because on one hand, we're fighting for some of the same issues of having rights as same-sex attracted people, but women and men occupy different stations in our social arrangements. So lesbians have needs and experiences that gay men don't have.
Yes, I actually, since I'm younger, I used to wonder about that. I was like, why did the lesbians and the gays not get along in the past, and still, but I do think she brings up really important points of how um, gay men were still upholding patriarchy. And so for lesbians, it's not really like it's against the interest of lesbians to organize together with gay men because of the patriarchy in the institutions. So even if, like, when the movement is united, the gay male experience becomes the dominant narrative and the experience of woman is pushed aside. So I do agree that it's important for lesbians to have like I'm bisexual, but the woman to woman female WLW attracted space that's separate.
Yeah. And now zoom forward, to now that we do have this big uh long alphabet of letters, this forced coalition. I mean, we're running into those same problems that certain letters of that alphabet are taking over and at the expense of all else. And since trans men have lost our own unique spaces, I mean, everything just gets branded T, as if we're all the same. And so a lot of the same things that she was pointing out in that chapter, and that dynamic between lesbians and gay men, I think is also true in the trans community, that trans men don't have all the same needs and we're not equal.
Yes. Yes.
So I think there's value in trans men and masculine women coming together because I do think we have more in common with one another in terms of the things that we experience, and those patterns of experiences. I think new coalitions need to be built around those patterns.
I agree. It also makes me inevitably think about, um, the clash between trans women who identify as lesbians and then a part of the lesbian community. Um, there's a lot of push for trans women's rights, but when it comes to lesbians, I think um, not all lesbians are on board. So that's another part of like I think where sex becomes a dividing factor, where people feel like they have different experiences, and it's not really working out. So that's kind of another conversation that needs to be had in the community, but um, people push it away because they don't want to offend or because they want to be seen as politically correct. Um, and maybe also feel like they don't want to divide the community, but I think there's already sort of disagreements and conflicts in the first place that need to be addressed, as opposed to people creating new conflict. Um, yeah, I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, but it does make me think of that um, as well.
Yeah. And then the last chapter, she talks about how social power affects what people are allowed to do and what can be seen, named, believed, and understood. For marginalized people, there can be a gap between one's own reality and the social categories through which to interpret it. I really found myself spending a lot of time with that chapter just because it relates so directly to the research that I'm doing right now, because I'm looking at trans men's experiences of sexual assault and how our dominant way of thinking about the trans experience is actually distorting trans men's ability to see and name these assaults clearly, and the patterns of it, the pattern vulnerability of it. Just because of categories, right? I mean, as long as they're thinking of themselves as I'm a man, I'm a man, I'm a man, they interpret everything that they experience as a man's experience, even when it's a very typical female experience.
Yes, yeah, I do think that in terms of having a language for understanding ourselves, um, the kind of current dominant understanding of being transgender or transsexual or trans um, really erases a big portion of the experience for a lot of people. And because it doesn't allow us to see the full scope of our reality, um, it blinds us to some of the horrible things that happen to us. As you said, like trans men, uh, kind of repeating the mantra of oh, I'm a man, I'm a man, when something horrible happens, when that's that actually wouldn't happen to a male.
Yeah. And unfortunately, when these dominant frameworks prevent us from seeing those things clearly, then it hinders our ability to do anything about it. Right. And that's one of its functions, right? Is it I guess to take it back to the birdcage metaphor, I mean, if there's something built into that system that prevents you from seeing the birdcage in the first place, I mean, that doesn't stop what's happening to you. It just stops your ability to see. It's like you're being attacked with a blindfold on, and you're trying to swat away these arrows, but you have no idea where those arrows are coming from or why. And It's the position that trans men are in is that we're experiencing things that we can't, we're being prevented from seeing and speaking about, which means we can't do anything about it to actually stop those things from happening.
And I think what makes it more difficult is that, I guess, politically and culturally speaking, most trans men do want to be seen and accepted as men, like in that role. Um, and so allowing for a lot of trans men's experience is trying to hide that and trying to prove that, I am a man and I know I'm female, but look at me now. I've changed. Um, and it can be painful, I think, to acknowledge the fact that we're still different even when we transition. Um, and so when something horrible happens to us, it can be a sort of protective mechanism, um, to not think outside of that, because it is used as a punishment to when trans men are told, oh, you're a woman or you're female. Um, and it's something that people are often told from a very young age as like a punishment, like, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. So then to acknowledge that some of the experiences might actually tie to something that we try to hide from the world, or um, something that causes us suffering. I know for a lot of trans men, being female, having a female body is experienced as suffering. So it's really a horrible position to be put in when something bad happens to you, and then it's because of something that you feel so much pain about. I think that's probably the main reason why, when it comes to oppression and discrimination, why for trans men it can be very challenging to go outside of the narrative. I'm a man, um, and I don't blame them. Yeah.
Yeah. Any last things? That takes us to our last chapter. Is there any last things that come to mind that you wanted to discuss in the book before we wrap up? Did you enjoy the book? Did you find it helpful?
I feel like all of the interesting essays were at the end. So
They
I
did
like
seem to
the
get progressive.
second.
I really love the birdcage metaphor. So chapter one has
Mm.
always been my favorite, but then I agree from there they get progressively better.
I like the one on sexism, and then the ones in the middle, I was like, I don't know. Because for me, I am more into, I guess, my background in like political philosophy. I'm really into Marxists. So I feel like they focus more on sort of, if it's about feminism, it's like the body and the reproductive capacity, and um, kind of that realm.
Mhm.
And also having access to like resources. Um, but for Frye, I think that's how you pronounce the last name,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think she's more psychoanalytical, which was difficult for me. As in she goes a lot into, um, I don't know if it's fair to call it psychological aspects, but she was using a lot of like metaphors, um, as was with the arrogant eye, for example, um, or the birdcage.
Yeah.
But I do think it's good for me to dive more into different sort of literature. I am a little bit biased,
Yeah.
so it was a good exercise for me. It was
Well,
nice.
as she said in the introduction, the goal of her book was to make patterns more visible. Do you
Right.
feel it did that for you? Do you feel like when you read it that there were certain patterns that seemed more visible to you?
I think for me personally, it was a little bit hard to connect to because it's such an old book. Well, it's not old, but I do think the world has changed a little bit So my experience with being female and also then transitioning and now being somewhere in a strange place with that, it did feel different to what she was describing. I think um, the place that woman used to occupy, I think she's from the United. Is she from the United States?
She is. Yep.
um, yeah, in the United States at the time when she was writing, it kind of, I guess, opened my eyes to how it's gotten a little bit better thanks to the activism that has happened. Like for example, she was talking about getting a library card when you were married and needing a permission of your husband. Like that's that's crazy to me. Like I don't think that happens nowadays. But there are still things that have to do with marriage that affect people's lives. But it did feel a little bit old. I think the parts I resonated with most um, was the chapter on sexism, where she talked about that ambiguous space um, that people have, because it kind of relates the most directly to my experience, where people can't tell what sex I am, and then it gets me into trouble.
Yeah.
And then the chapters on separatism and lesbian feminism and gay rights, I also connected the most to those chapters because they actually felt relevant. But the rest of the book, um, I think I struggled to connect with. Um,
Do you have a recommendation for the next book? Did you still want to read the dialectic of sex?
I do, I do. I hope we get to read it. It seems close to home for me because she
I
has
have
that.
it, but because I'm on the road, all my books are packed, so it'll be a while before I can get access to it again, but
Mm.
I would be happy for that to be our next read.
I really hope we get to read it. I got it at the library by chance. Just I was passing the bookshelves in the feminist section and I saw it and I was like, that's what I need to read. That sounds like my kind of book. So I would love to read it with y'all.
Okay, let's make that our next book. It's been a while since I've read it, so I just need some time to settle into my new place and get my stuff unpacked so I can find that book.
We have all the time in the world. So no hurry.
Well, it was great to see you. We've been so busy. It took us a while to get through this book, but I'm glad that you're able to join me for this conversation this time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, Aaron. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited for the next for my second meeting. I'm really looking forward to it.
We're really happy to have you join us.
My pleasure.
Have a good night.
You too, Aaron. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Take care.